Thanks, everyone. Thank you. What an amazing turnout. Good morning and welcome to the 2025 Peter Mac Women in Science Symposium and the Lear Medal presentation. Thank you to everyone who's here in person in Parkville and also to everyone who's joined us online. We will start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on where we're meeting today, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to all elders past and present and acknowledge any First Nations people who are here with us today. Before we run through the plan for today, we're going to do some introductions and of course a bit of housekeeping. So I am Associate Professor Laura Forrest, she, her, and I'm joined today by Dr. Laurie Smith. Together, we have been co-chairing the Research, Gender, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the past almost 4 years. And we are going to be hosting the morning today. If you require bathrooms, they are to your left. You can find them just down the corridor there and they're opposite the lecture theatre. We'd also ask if everybody could please turn any devices to mute or silent, please, just so that we don't have any proceedings interrupted. We are going to be pausing for morning tea at about 10:20 for 30 minutes. And we hope that that gives everybody enough time to meet and catch up with all your friends and colleagues, to connect and to chat about what we have heard so far this morning.
So good morning, I'm Dr. Laurie Smith, she, her. So we have got a lot to get through today and a really exciting lineup of speakers, including our Lear medalists. But we are really looking forward to hearing from you too. So we're going to be taking questions for each guest speaker through the Menti platform. So to submit the question, visit menti.com, enter the code that you're hopefully seeing on the screen, or scan the QR barcode. So we will start with an introduction and welcome from the Peter Mac Board Chair, Professor Rosemary McKenzie, who we're delighted to have with us here today. After that, we're going to hear from Peter Mac Consumer Representative Diane Fisher. Our Lear medalist will then be announced before we hear from our special guest, Dr. Nikki Vincent, who will deliver today's keynote presentation. So after morning tea, we will then hear from our Lear medalists who will present their work. And we'll cap the day off with our second keynote speaker, Professor Shaneen Sandhu. So both Laura and myself are past Lear medalists, and our careers have benefited from the funding from these awards and from the prestige that comes with it as well. So in previous years, when I've hosted this event, I've reflected on what the Lear medal means to me personally, and to sum it up, it's been an absolute game changer. So it gave me the resources to forge collaborations, both nationally and internationally, that underpins all of my current research and all of the funding that's allowing me to do that. And that's on top of the impacts that you can't measure, which is the confidence, motivation, and the inspiration. But this year, I also wanted to reflect more broadly on what this initiative has achieved in the 8 years since its inception. So of the 17 Lear alumni, 30% are now group leaders, 40% have received fellowships, and 65% have received NHMRC funding. So unfortunately, sometimes affirmative action is needed, and in this case, it's clearly working. So this type of work that we're doing, I think, is really important, more important than ever. Diversity, equity, inclusion programs are currently under attack. In the US, the Trump administration is dismantling all D&I initiatives, departments, and projects. And so this is obviously alarming. But I think it's a really good time to just reflect on what actually underpins the work of the RJEDI. And it's more than just these terms. So the work we do really boils down to identifying, advocating for, and implementing solutions that attract and retain talent and promote unbiased access to opportunities for all research staff so they can fulfill their potential. So this is obviously going to maximize research productivity, which aligns with Peter Mac's core values of excellence and innovation. And so what we do extends beyond these labels, and they might take the labels away, but the mission will stay the same. So with that, I'm going to pass back to Laura, but I also want to take this opportunity to really acknowledge Laura. It's been an amazing experience co-leading RJEDI with you over the last 4 years. You're just an absolute boss in everything that you do, and you're going to be greatly missed. But yeah, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Laurie. I'm already missing the committee. So like Laurie, I have had the opportunity over the last few years at this event to reflect about what the Leah offered me. And that offered me validation, confidence in myself and in my research, and contributed towards my resilience, and it made me feel seen. But this year, as potentially the final time that I'll be up here, and I'm a little bit emotional because it's meant a lot. emceeing this event with Laurie, I want to mention the and factor. Leah was not established to be divisive. It's an affirmative action mechanism. It was one of the first of these types of actions at Peter Mac that have begun to address gender equity and acknowledge that women demonstrate leadership potential and excellence in their research, as well as the men who have traditionally dominated research leadership positions. The and the as well is crucial and is inclusive. It is open-minded, it is exciting, and it leads to endless possibilities and potentials. Ultimately, and leads to acknowledgement and celebration of diversity, and allows consideration of all the various diversity factors and begins the conversation about intersectionality. This to me is what the Leah has germinated. It began the conversation about gender, and 8 or 9 years later, I calculated 9, but that's okay. We are now finally beginning to discuss other aspects of diversity and intersectionality here in research at Peter Mac. We have incredible diversity and therefore intersectionality here in our research workforce, but also in our research portfolios. For me, the Leah Medal acknowledged this too. When I was awarded the Leah in 2019, and the and factor was at play, not just for me as a woman, but also for my research program. The diversity in our research programs that year was acknowledged, it was celebrated, and it continues to be put on show. We can have world-leading cancer genomic research like, and slightly risky, like Traceback, that tests deceased women's ovarian cancer tissue, like Cascade, the rapid autopsy program that internationally people look to us to say, God, how do you do that? How do you run that program? And we can seek to understand the experiences and the outcomes for the people whose lives and life courses are changed by these programs. The Leah does not offer dichotomy. It is not an either or. To me, it's about open-mindedness, the exciting potential of diversity and intersectionality. The Leah has been a starting point, and there is still more work to be done here at Peter Mac with regard to attitudes and to culture to ensure that the value of diversity and intersectionality is translated from action to outcomes. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Peter Mac's Board Chair, Professor Rosemary McKenzie, who we are delighted to have here with us this morning. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Laura and Laurie. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we are meeting on today and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm so pleased to see so many people here today to join with us in considering the issues and celebrate the contributions of women in health and medical research. This is my first time presenting the Leah Medals as a board chair, and it's an honour I've been really looking forward to. These matters are dear to my heart too. I'm pleased to welcome our partners from throughout the Parkville Precinct hospitals, the WEHI, the University of Melbourne, Epworth Health, Murdoch Children's Research Institute, and other medical research and healthcare organisations from around Melbourne and Victoria. This event is about bringing together women in science and their allies to share work, recognise the challenges, and very importantly, to celebrate our successes, and there have been many. It's also about making new connections. As I said, we have many partners and friends here today, and strengthening those relationships. As in science, progress towards gender equity can't be achieved in isolation, and Peter Mac is very committed to working with others on these important issues. I think our connections at this point in our history are more important than ever. Internationally and even close to home, there's a concerning rise in rhetoric that encourages division. despite the great progress that communities of all types and backgrounds have made in embracing equity, diversity and inclusion. And I'm very proud to say those words. We know that people do their best work when they feel safe to bring their whole selves to work. Diversity is a driver of innovation. Different perspectives, different backgrounds underpin the transformative work we do at Peter Mac. I see diversity all around me every time I come to Peter Mac, and I am sure it strengthens what we do. Here we have a diverse range of disciplines, a diverse range of clinical backgrounds, a diverse range of ethnic and faith backgrounds, and all of these people with their commitment contribute to the holistic care and compassion that we show our patients. Diversity is key to that. Despite the significant advances of recent decades for women, we do continue to be underrepresented in the research sector, particularly at the higher echelons. And keeping women in STEM sectors beyond the early and mid-career phases continues to be a challenge. We all have a role to play in learning from the experiences of those around us and driving system-level change. To this end, I want to touch on some of the very positive things that we are doing here at Peter Mac. Peter Mac's Research, Gender, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Committee, led by the wonderful Laurie and Laura, continues to be a driving force for change, and it's a valued forum in which our researchers can raise ideas and concerns. We're also very proud and very grateful that Peter MacCallum Cancer Foundation, and lovely to see Craig here today, funds schemes to support women researchers through some of the most challenging points in their career. Thanks to the foundation, in 2024, 5 of our researchers received $15,000 through the Endurance Professional Development Grants for parents and carers. 3 researchers received $70,000 to maintain their research momentum during and after parental leave as part of our Research Momentum for Parents scheme. We have dedicated diversity and inclusion consultants, and they work right across Peter Mac to help make our workplace welcoming and safe. Their efforts to educate our workforce mean that everyone at Peter Mac is better equipped to understand difference and build a more supportive environment for all. As a woman, a mother of daughters, and a university educator and researcher, I think I understand many of the challenges, the interruptions and the barriers that women face in advancing their careers throughout different life stages. I've been very fortunate on my journey to be supported by family members and mentored by wonderful leaders in the community, both women and men. And I'm very grateful for that support and allyship. While I've been fortunate, I do not underestimate the perseverance, the resilience and the courage that many people from different and minority backgrounds need to draw upon to advance in their chosen field. And I commend them for those qualities. They are wonderful qualities. I recognise that we still have a long way to go. I think you're absolutely right in your remarks today in achieving true equity across the health and medical research sectors, and not only for women. Gender equity continues to be a very key consideration for our board, our executive team, and I know for senior leaders throughout the organisation. I'm very encouraged to see so many committed people engaging with these issues and genuinely pressing for solutions. I'm now very pleased to introduce our first invited speaker, consumer advocate Diane Fisher. As many of you already know, at Peter Mac, we really do strive to put the patient and their experience, the experiences of their family, at the centre of everything we do. We have a 300-strong consumer register. These generous volunteers, patient, family members, carers, all have lived experience of cancer, and they bring that to the voluntary work they do for us as members of the register. They work closely with our staff right across Peter Mac, and they provide unique and important insights into the design and delivery, not only of our research, but our services and support programs. Diane is a passionate consumer register member. We are very grateful for her contributions. Drawing on her own experience of cancer, as well as her professional expertise in change management, Diane has advised Peter Mac research, clinical care, governance and education. She is one of 2 consumers on our Outpatient Services Steering Committee, and she's currently working with 4 PhD researchers in the breast and prostate cancer streams. That is a huge commitment. Welcome, Diane, and thank you for joining us to share your insights today.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present the patient story at the Women in Science Symposium in 2025. It's a very deep felt honour. In 2001, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I doubt I will ever forget my surgeon's words. You have stage 3 breast cancer, negative to 3 receptors for which we can test. And I've arranged these tests for you to undertake. We know how much breast cancer you have, but what we don't know is whether there's the rest of the body involved. That was Christmas Eve for the business community 2021. 2 thoughts stand out in the roller coaster that followed. Firstly, as we celebrated with friends and family, I wondered whether 2001 would be my last Christmas. I didn't actually know what triple negative breast cancer was at that stage. Secondly, there were a whole range of public holidays and they kind of rolled into weekends, and then clinics closed down because there was only one day to open up. And I just got angrier and angrier that nobody could get on and tell me where I was and what I needed to do. Evidence today, 2001 wasn't the last Christmas. The pathology meant that I was a candidate for surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation therapy. Slash, poison, and burn. That's how I referred to my treatment year. Now, the question arises, how do you incorporate that? And it was just about a full year into a career. My career is change management. It has been built on changing the lives of other people. Wherever an entity wishes to make a change, then the skills in change management walks along the team leaders, the management leaders to undertake that change, or should. I was contracted to the main group at that stage. I was part of the team of the centralised services that payroll, HR, finance, treasury, accounts payable. And we took them out of the 22 entities that made up main group and centralised them into what was called a shared services function. If I can apologise to anybody who was on the main group payroll at that point in time, I do understand the problems that you had, because that wasn't one of our most glamorous moments. There were many standout leaders, however, particularly as far as my career was concerned. The general manager for shared services was a lady who asked, what do I want? And what did the medical profession say or recommend? What did I want? Answer, I don't know. What did the medical profession say or recommend? Undertake your surgery and then take 2 weeks for yourself post-hospital. So that's what we did. My contract was suspended and I had the time And I had the assurance that there was no finality to my contract until I was in the post-op period and back to discuss what came next. Come February, I had a post-op plan. The slush was done, here comes the poison, and then comes the burn. 6 months of chemotherapy, and then 2 months of radiation therapy. The medical recommendation, target yourself to undertake no more than a 50% workload in everything you do. So that's what we did. Again, this leadership. 50% meant that the contract was extended rather than the deliverables halved. So that gave me a sense of accomplishment and achievement. Secondly, and more importantly, there was a clause inserted in our contract that meant that I would not be remunerated for any more than a 50% week, governing both of us not to crib on the medical expertise. A very, very clear message. When chemo and radiation were done, I progressively returned to full-time work. Regrowth of hair and nails took substantially longer, but I have a number of funny stories of my wig-wearing period of time, and I kind of relish some of the achievements in that period of time. Number one, I was 42 years of age and I had been promised that if my hair returned, it would be grey. It's not. And I have no hairdresser helping with this yet. The next chapter couldn't have been a bigger contrast. With a completed contract at Maine, I was back on the market looking with competitive bids for work. Nothing new in this room for those researchers who are here. The difference between commercial work and research work is if one contract doesn't come on, my skill service is suitable in another entity. There isn't that luxury in research, and I understand that. Here's one of the most faced questions and scenarios. The interviewer. I noticed you spent a good part of last year only working part-time. Was there a reason for that? Yes, I had breast cancer. That was my treatment year, but I'm fine now and I'm back at full-time work. Result, no contract. And when I traced it back, the feedback was very regularly, great candidate, but she might die. Spoiler alert, that's a given fact, not some insight into a probability. The key learning, as a community, we need to embrace the phrase that became very popular in 2002. Cancer is a word, not a sentence. Now, if I dial the clock forward to 2022, there must be something about those years, we moved my experience to where I was enveloped into the Peter MacCallum experience. My GP referred me to Dr. Karen Barclay, and Dr. Barclay diagnosed extramammary Paget's disease on my buttocks. And she referred me to Dr. Glenguira at Peter MacCallum. Very importantly, the referral was to a specific person, but here. To quote Karen, this is complex, little known, and you need the holistic approach of research and excellence working together that is best delivered at Peter MacCallum. I would later learn that Glenn and Karen had crossed paths at Melbourne University, where Karen is a senior lecturer in surgery. The journey here has been extraordinary. The chapters are poison and burn, / and more poison. Before the surgery was a neoadjuvant, chemo and radiation, and it was delivered very fortunately at Box Hill. I'm not sure how weeks 4 and 5 climbing onto that Lenark with pelvic radiation would ever have been achieved if I had to commute into Parkville. Then there were the 19 days in hospital here, of which 5 were spent in ICU. And then there were 20 days of hospital in the home. My surgery was an APR, an abdominoperineal resection. And that means the removal of the affected skin on the buttocks, a section of the lower large intestine, creation of a permanent stoma, removal of some lymph glands, and the creation of an IGAMS. And I am going to use my notes here. That's an inferior gluteal artery myocutaneous island transport flap. This was designed to remodel my posterior and a lot of my interior as well. I'm the beneficiary of the research that has been undertaken and documented here. The IGAMS flap was compared with the previous gold standard, and the research which bears Peter Mac researchers specifically indicated that there was reduced complications, particularly from the donor site, with the IGAMS against the previous gold standard. I'm the beneficiary of the patient-centered, where care is a first nature. I'm going to hypothesize here, dangerous in a research community, but I do wonder whether being a teaching hospital, there is a sense of role modeling that means that each and every one is on their best and brings their best to what they do each and every day. During my hospital visit, I met Danielle. Danielle works in your area where process and systems are being improved. And she was on a hospital in the home visit to observe. And in conversations, she suggested that the consumer engagement might be something in which I was interested when I was upright and able. It is Danielle's encouragement that brings me here today. In a career sense, I was ready to start and think about a transition to retirement. So I am one of those 300 who are on your consumer register. I am one who has participated in the over 150 activities that were completed in 2024. And Rosemary spoke to us of the range and the spread of those. And I'm still starting to reconcile with myself why an outpatient governance committee was such a good idea. The workload is enormous, but I've been on the other side, so I can make a difference. Each of these opportunities brings me into contact with the shared interest and a different community of people. Each opportunity helps me stay relevant, interested, and an active participant in our community. These are 3 of the things that my consulting work brings for me. So are there some messages in this narrative pertinent to today? I think so. In many ways, the challenges we wrestle with in the formalised version of gender equity, diversity, and inclusion are tackling what my grandmother used to say. People are different, and these differences are important, and they enrich our lives. Even my grandma understood the "and" component. My difference in 2001 was that I had a cancer diagnosis when cancer was not a conversation topic, and I was able to work with appropriate changes, time, and understanding. This enabled me to bring my best self to that assignment. My difference in 2024 was that I was looking for active engagement in a field where I could contribute my skills, and the consumer register offers me that opportunity. In the area around the pink couches on level 7, if you haven't ever done so, please read the plaque beside Sir Peter MacCallum's portrait. And in it, you will find these words: "We value humanity, care, and research in equal measures." Stories like mine come about because people, just like each of you, value humanity, care, and research in equal measure. And I thank you for that.
Very much, Diane. That was profound, moving, and such a fascinating insight and important insight into the intersectionality between being diagnosed with cancer at an ultimate time in your career, absolutely kicking goals. And the insight that we can gain from that is hugely important. The humanity that you've brought today is valuable to us all, so thank you. We do have time for just a couple of questions. Now, if you are in the room and would like to ask a question, please raise your hands. We have more people with microphones here. If you're watching online, you can submit questions via Menti. And we've got this, I think you can use Menti as well in the room. Yeah, anything goes. So now, does anyone have a question to start with? Nothing online? Great. Oh, Craig, thanks. Just behind you. Thanks, Gunjan.
Diane, Craig Conley's my name. Wonderful speech, thank you. Did you find it emotionally challenging taking on the role and working with consumers, given the experience you'd had twice with different forms of cancer? Was it a challenge for you, or was it easy? I'm just curious.
The door's shut because this has got two sides to it. Yes, it's incredibly challenging, especially when we introduce ourselves and many of us will tell our story. And you sort of sit there and think, oh my goodness, my road was easy. But it's also incredibly enriching. Earlier this week, I participated with the allied health professionals who are graduates here, and they do a once a month professional gathering. And I had the opportunity for the very first time to tell my story, show pictures of my butt in both extramammary Paget's disease. And if you need to go away and look that one up and think, I don't know what she's talking about, a retrospective study done in 2020 in the United States for the 16 prior years suggested that the population in the United States was 1 in a million. Glenn Guira has seen just the second case since I first met him in 2022 here. So visually, too early in the morning for it, I promise. But if you imagine the worst case of eczema you've ever seen and the worst case of psoriasis you've ever seen, and they get together and go, whoopee, what can we do? Let your imagination run wild and take some time before morning tea. That's what it looks like. And another photo of my butt during radiation, which makes you wonder what on earth you're looking at. It is so red, there is skin melting, it is black, it is confronting. The flap's pretty good. And the plastic surgeons are pretty proud of it. But that was the first time I did that. And I can only tell you how empowering that was to be able to, in an understanding, useful audience, useful me to them, to be able to share that and stand and say, this is me and this is my life going forward. So yes, confronting because we meet people who 6 months later are not there to be met again. And you know that. But let me go back to that expert recruiter. That's a fact. We are all going to depart. So thank you for your question.
Thank you. We have time for just one more question. Great. I was about to ask one, but I'd much prefer if you did. Can we get a microphone or I will run? No, thank you.
Hi Diane, thanks very much for your story. My name's Yovana and I'm just interested in what your advice would be to organisations and workplaces in making that decision that you said was so important to yourself about retaining and accommodating a person who's going through a challenge such as yourself versus doing the supposedly easy thing and just moving on to the next candidate.
For the accountants in the room, I'm about to apologise, not. In graphical terms, use the parts of your body, not the balance sheet that's on the desk. You have 2 ears, you have 1 mouth, and you have a heart. And you also have an intestinal system that tells you when things just don't feel right. Please use those, listen to those, and be in tune with them. I was working for a large organisation, and I recognise occupying a position during that can be done. But the amount of strength of purpose, validation for who I was there. And it doesn't just have to be in those commercial situations. I'm also a member of a Rotary Club, and I had a colleague who understood where I was, what my journey was, and said, right, I need somebody to build some training materials that we will use in the Rotary environment to educate on a whole range of topics. And that validation of the regular once a fortnight getting together to demonstrate what I'd done and setting small targets for me to work with while I was under treatment. Absolutely enormous. A decision in that way is an investment in another human being, not necessarily a cost-benefit analysis against a project plan. Please use your organs, not your balance sheet.
Thank you very much, Diane. My gut and my heart are telling me that that was very enjoyable and was you were absolutely the right person to ask to come and speak to us today. So thank you. It's been an absolute privilege. We are now going to hand back to Professor Mackenzie, who will be joined by Craig Connolly, the Chief Executive of the Peter MacCallum Cancer Foundation, to present the Leah Medals.
Thank you, Laura. And Diane, if I can just add my thanks. That was an amazing story, and thank you again for all you do for Peter Mac. Well, now we're at the exciting part of the morning. No, there are other exciting parts too, but this is sort of why we're here today. Craig, this is your first Leah Medal Women in Science Symposium, mine too. And Craig is 7 weeks in the job as Chief Executive of the wonderful Peter Mac Foundation. So I'm very pleased to ask you to say a few words on behalf of the foundation.
Thanks, Rosemary. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to almost abandon my prepared words. I want to acknowledge Laurie and Laura, first off, 4 years as co-chairs. Congratulations. The emotion, Laura, for you when you acknowledge this was your last meeting, I understand that, and it reminds me how important these sessions are. Diversity, equity, inclusion matters, and it's not lost on me. Diane, I'm a survivor and I'm an accountant, I apologise. And pre-cancer, I was a bad accountant, and I was, not a great business person. I thought I was, but in hindsight, I wasn't. My cancer journey taught me the importance, to your point, of people. And so to answer that question that was asked before, if you're at an organisation that can't work out how to retain you when you're going through whatever challenges you're going through, find another organisation. Because every organisation, the biggest asset outside of property or rent is people. And that's pretty much right across the board. And so I'm so pleased to have joined an organisation like Peter MacCallum Cancer Foundation and the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre. We had our first board meeting yesterday, so I've had the opportunity to engage with the board, engage with members of the hospital board. I've engaged with members of the executive, and there is a very consistent focus on the quality of people, on ensuring that people here are supported as best they can. There is acknowledgement that executive doesn't get everything right, but there is a clear effort to ensure that that is improved. My role at the foundation with a much smaller team is to ensure that culturally, my team understands that culture equals people. And that to me is what a lot of people often miss. We talk about culture, we don't think about what it really means. And people means diversity, equity, and inclusion that should be celebrated. So I'm so pleased to be here today. So pleased that the foundation supports the Lear Medals. I take no credit for it, as I've been here for 7 weeks. I acknowledge the foresight by both the hospital and the foundation in seeking to fund the Lear Medal, in seeking to fund support for early and mid-career women researchers. And I acknowledge how impactful it is for people on their journey at different stages of their journey. So Rosemary, thank you so much. And to everyone here, thank you. And we're now pleased to celebrate the 2 award winners.
Thank you, Craig, and we're very grateful for the incredible support of the foundation and the many donors who support our researchers to continue their groundbreaking work. It's now our pleasure to present the 2025 Lear Medals, named after the Latin word for lioness, Liana. The Lear Medals help raise the profile of Peter Mac women, researchers in the critical early to mid stages of their careers. Each recipient will receive $50,000 in support from the Peter MacCallum Cancer Foundation, a very important contribution to career development, enabling them to access a whole range of career progression opportunities. Past recipients of the Lear Medal have used the funding to travel overseas, establish international research collaborations, complete further research training, fund research students, and attend conferences to present their work. There are many worthy recipients potentially, and before we recognise the 2 researchers this year in the categories of dedicated researcher and clinician researcher, I'd also like to acknowledge our runners-up. And we have 2 runners-up, Aparna Rao and Deborah Mayran, and I would ask you to join me in congratulating them on their efforts. I'll now turn to the first recipient of the Lear Medal for 2025, and I am delighted to announce and congratulate our first winner, Dr. Maria Furtado. Now, if I seemed... Yeah, you can hold them for me. I'm going to say a few words. Let me take a glass. I am going to say a few words about Maria, and if I seemed a little familiar, I should say it's because I work at, in my other life, work at the University of Melbourne School of Population and Global Health, as does Maria in part of her professional life. And she's a wonderful staff member in both organisations, and it is a particular pleasure to announce you as the winner today, Maria. And I will say a few words. I've lost my notes. I've been so excited about Maria winning. Dr. Furtado is Director of Peter Mac's Psychosocial Oncology Service, and she is, as I said, a Senior Research Fellow at the University of Melbourne. Maria has over 20 years of clinical experience. She completed her PhD in 2022. Her research spans psycho-oncology, suicide prevention and intervention evaluation. Dr. Furtado is passionate about co-designing mental health interventions with consumers. She is very focused on addressing inequities in care and outcomes for priority populations. And she is an enthusiastic and effective local and international collaborator, working with others to achieve great things. She uses education and training to bring research findings into practice. She has 54 peer-reviewed papers, 1 book chapter, 24 reports for the Australian government, and I'd really like to highlight those 24 reports for the Australian government because I think the policy relevance of what many of our researchers do is incredibly important and sometimes overlooked in the very dramatic world of biomedical research. So congratulations on that policy impactful work, Dr. Furtado. Please join me in extending our congratulations, and we'll ask Maria to say a few words.
Thank you. Thanks. I've got all my bosses in one room. I am deeply grateful to the Research Executive and the Peter Mac Foundation for this immense privilege of being recognised as one of this year's Lea Medal Award recipients. The award was established to recognise the gender imbalance in research, especially in our senior researchers. So I want to take a moment really to acknowledge all the female researchers here at Peter Mac, and in particular our senior researchers. I get so delighted when I see an email from the CEO or Ricky or Comms puts out an email saying, this is, so one of our senior female researchers has achieved great things. They're changing lives. They've gotten a promotion. I sit at my desk and I see this image come up and I have a little silent cheer and like, you go, you go. These female researchers are leading the path forward. They are sacrificing hours and hours away from their family to achieve these great things. And I am deeply grateful that they have role modelled a path forward for me. This Lea Medal Award is very significant to me. It is really an acknowledgement of my own research. It's an acknowledgement of my potential for their future leadership in research. And it will provide me with opportunities to collaborate with international stakeholders, continue my career in research, and also establish myself as an independent researcher here at Peter Mac. It is also very important and significant to me here because it puts in the limelight mental health research at Peter Mac and makes mental health research evident and public and puts it out there throughout Peter Mac and our Peter Mac community. Mental health research improves patient satisfaction and outcomes, but it saves lives, and that's what's very dear and important to me. When I first did my PhD and finished, I had years and years of clinical experience. I've been working in cancer for almost 20 years. My PhD was not in oncology because there was no clinical psychologist or very few around the country that could help in this way. So, which leads me to why the award is really important to me as well, is because I lead the psychosocial oncology team here at Peter Mac. It is an extraordinary team of mental health nurses, psychiatrists, clinical psychologists. Most of them are female. Most of them have PhDs, doctorates, higher degrees, and I want them to have a pathway forward. I want us to create a culture where mental health research at Peter Mac is something that's easy, it's doable, not necessarily easy, but there is a pathway forward for my team. Before I finish up, I'd really like to thank my boss, Associate Professor Andy Dimich and Professor James Perks, the University of Melbourne. They are incredibly generous and supportive and have so much expertise and have helped my career along the way with great support. I also want to thank my early career colleagues and mid-career colleagues, Jackie Frowen, Kate Thompson, Bridget Basilios, because they truly get this stage of research. When we're in, they come and look at my E and go, and they just totally understand without needing words. So thank you.
Congratulations again, Dr. Furtado, and we wish you all the very best in your continued work. Now to award the second Lear Medal for 2025. And I think Craig's you're prepared. This award goes to a Peter Mac laboratory researcher. Congratulations to Dr. Jennifer Devlin. Now I'm going to say a few words about you before we. I'm very pleased to say a few words to introduce Dr. Devlin. Jennifer is a senior postdoctoral researcher in the Johnston Gene Regulation Laboratory. She completed her PhD here at Peter Mac in 2015. Her research focuses on dissecting the molecular mechanisms that control gene expression to identify transcriptional vulnerabilities that may be exploited for cancer treatment. Dr. Devlin has 19 publications, has received almost 1,500 citations and attracted $1.75 million in funding through bodies including the NHMRC, the Victorian Cancer Agency, and of course the Peter Mac Foundation. Dr. Devlin's research has contributed to new knowledge about the therapeutically targetable interplay between ribosome biogenesis and mRNA, I know that term, mRNA translation. We hear it frequently. And I'm looking forward, Jennifer, to learning a good deal when you present on your work. The influence of the cell of origin for tumour pathogenesis and the cooperation between cyclin-dependent kinases for the control of gene expression. To me, it sounds like it might be very powerful. Jennifer is also an active member of the Peter Mac community. She dedicates time to the Peter Mac Postdoc Society and a range of other staff groups. Congratulations again, Dr.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming today. First of all, I'd like to thank the Research, Gender, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion team and the co-chairs Laurie and Laura for this wonderful honour. And I'd also like to thank Craig and Rosemary for their introduction and the Peter MacCallum Foundation for funding this tremendous initiative. And I'd also like to thank Diane for sharing with us her wonderful words and her guidance and her incredible story. Before I get to what this means to me, I'd like to thank the people that I've worked with over the years that I've been at Peter Mac. I'd like to thank my group leader, Professor Ricky Johnston, and all of the members, past and present, of the Johnston Lab. And in particular, I'd like to shout out all of the students that I've been fortunate enough to supervise. They've made me a better person, I think, as well as being a better scientist. So thank you to all of them. So I think as Maria, and congratulations also to Maria on her award, as she alluded to, it is an incredible honour to be recognised with this award. It really makes you feel validated that the research that you're doing is important and that you're a seen member of the Peter Mac community. I'm really excited about the opportunities that this award will deliver to me, enabling me to accelerate my research and to be able to continue on a pathway to being an independent researcher in the cancer research space. This award will allow me to transform my research by hopefully applying some exciting new technologies, which are growing in focus both here at Peter Mac and in the precinct as well as internationally. It'll give me the opportunity to travel internationally to research conferences and to visit key collaborators to be able to build and strengthen my research network and increase my profile in the international research field that I'm working in. So what I'd also like to do is I really want to thank the entire Peter Mac community. So I first came to Peter Mac, which was in the old building at East Melbourne in late 2009 when I was looking for a honours project and a supervisor. And what I always remember, it was how dynamic I thought the environment was when I visited. It was an atmosphere that I didn't feel when I went to any of the other research institutes to look for projects. And the more I reflect on it, the more I feel it's because of the unique environment that Peter Mac offers to cancer researchers such as myself, who work in what's called a more basic discovery research area, looking at the fundamental properties of cancer cells and then trying to find new pathways to apply better treatment outcomes for patients in the clinic. The coexistence of the research environment and the clinical space where patients come every day, the ability of clinical researchers and basic researchers in the laboratory to interact is something that doesn't happen in many places. So this is an amazing environment with amazing initiatives for cancer researchers. Thank you everybody again for listening, and enjoy the rest of the morning.
Congratulations again, Dr. Devlin, and I'm really looking forward to those presentations after morning tea. Peter Mac really is incredibly fortunate to have the range of talent across the whole spectrum of research disciplines, many of them here in this room today. The Leah Medal, though, is especially important in our calendar of events because of its important focus on early to mid-career women. And I'm certainly going to continue to very strongly support this event and this program of encouragement, and I look forward to it again next year. Thank you all once again for joining us this morning. I'll hand back to Laurie and Laura to introduce our first keynote speaker, but I would like to also personally thank Dr. Vincent and Professor Sandhu for joining us today. Very much appreciate your expertise and time in what I know is an incredibly busy week in the calendar for you both. So thank you very much, Dr. Vincent and Professor Sandhu. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Professor Mackenzie, and to Craig for joining her to present the Leah Medals. Thanks again also to the Peter MacCallum Cancer Foundation and all of the donors for the support that allow us to put on this amazing initiative. And most importantly, congratulations to the 2 Leah medalists. So it is my absolute pleasure now to introduce Dr. Nikki Vincent, who is our first keynote speaker of the day. So Dr. Vincent was appointed Victoria's first public sector Gender Equality Commissioner in 2020 and was reappointed for a second term in 2024. In this role, she oversees the implementation of the Victorian Gender Equality Act, a long-standing and passionate advocate for gender equality in the community and workplaces. Dr. Vincent is a key Australian leader in this area, so we're really lucky to have her here today. So prior to her current role, Dr. Vincent served as the South Australian Commissioner for Equal Opportunity and CEO of the Leaders Institute of South Australia. She's established 2 successful not-for-profit organisations and has led major programs of academic research. We're really delighted to welcome you, Dr. Vincent. We know our executive team has met with you last year and they were really energised and inspired by your thoughts and approaches. So welcome, thank you.
I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And it's so beautiful looking out at that land. I pay my respects to elders past and present, any emerging leaders and any other First Nations people who are here today. Their enduring connection to this land reminds us that our work for equality and justice is part of a much larger story. I've been so inspired this morning. Thank you so much for the privilege of speaking at this event. Thank you to Laura and Laurie for the amazing work. You know, I can see how emotional it is for you, how important it is for you, and I really appreciate it. To Diane, your story was so incredibly powerful. Thank you so much. I have one of my daughters had a brain tumour, and I could very much identify with parts of your story. Also to the recipients of the award, Maria in particular. When my daughter had a brain tumour, that psychosocial work, when we first came across it and my daughter had to come to Victoria for one lot of surgery, it was the first time in all of the treatment that we had that, and it made all the difference, I can tell you. So thank you. And to Jennifer as well, your work sounds amazing. I have really no idea what it actually is all about, but it sounds incredible, and thank you so much for it. And to Peter Mac in general for all the work that you do. 30 years ago, the world committed to gender equality with the Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action. And yet here we stand today, really, with progress still measured more in centimetres, I think, than leaps. According to the World Economic Forum, at the current pace of change, it will take 131 years for us to close the gender gap globally. And even in the 59 countries of the world where women now are more highly educated than men, there is still a gender income gap of 39% in favour of men. While the level of gender inequality that we face here in Victoria is far less than in some parts of the world, we aren't immune. Far too many women and girls in Australia face the terror, often daily, of violence and other forms of abuse from men. One woman was killed every 11 days by an intimate partner in 22-23, compared with one man every 91 days. In 2023, there were 38,318 victim survivors of sexual assault recorded by police, with increases across almost every state and territory, and 84% of these were women and girls. Almost 70% took place in a residential location, and family and domestic violence related assaults made up 39% of these sexual assaults reported to police. There's probably a lot more that weren't, and that means there were 14,059 victim survivors. And that data is from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. In our workplaces, the gender pay gap remains stubbornly high. We've done some research at my commission on intersectional pay gaps, and when you start breaking it down, women of colour, women with disability, Aboriginal women have much higher pay gaps, and I'm really proud that intersectionality is actually enshrined in our legislation. We know that women still face a disproportionate burden in parental leave and sexual harassment, as well as underrepresentation in leadership roles. And compared to other OECD countries, we have a much higher proportion of women in part-time work, and that speaks of the lack of flexibility in workplaces. Women on average do 9 hours a week more unpaid care than men, even when they're doing the same amount of paid work. And in the public healthcare sector, where 77% of employees are women, 60% of senior leadership and 7% of CEOs and 59% of board members are women. This is a very women concentrated sector. The mean total remuneration pay gap, and this is 2023 data in our sector, we collect 90 million points of data every couple of years. The total remuneration pay gap is a shocking 32.3% in favour of men. So with all those women doing all that amazing work, the men still get paid more. This is the largest pay gap by far in the whole of the public sector, and our legislation covers local government, universities, it covers police and emergency services, museums, courts, all the departments, you name it, the broadest kind of sense of the public sector that you can have. It is more, this pay gap is more than 3 times the next largest pay gap. And that next largest pay gap is 10%, just over 10%, and that is in finance, transport, and police and emergency services. So you are 3 times worse than those 3 male-dominated sectors. This isn't merely a statistic, it is a stark reminder of the work that still needs to be done. And as if these challenges weren't enough, we now also, as you mentioned, face a backlash against gender equality on the global stage in many places, most notably the United States, but actually it's a worldwide phenomenon. A regressive narrative is trying, with some success, to reverse the hard-won gains. This is a direct challenge to the rights, dignity and opportunities of millions of people. Here in Victoria, I think we need to hold steady against this tide, pushing back against claims that gender equality is an ideology as opposed to a human right. Instead, we can use this opposition, I think, for fuel for our resolve as we proactively shape an inclusive future. And that's why the work that you're doing here is so important. Victoria's chosen to lead by turning our aspirations into law. Our Gender Equality Act is the first of its kind in Australia. It's one of few in the world, and it has much greater coverage across the legislation than any other in the world. It is really powerful. It covers 300 plus organisations and over 450,000 employees. It requires organisations to undertake rigorous audits every 2 years, evaluating everything from the gender composition of boards and at all levels of their workforce to recruitment and promotion practices, access to leave and flexible work, pay gaps and gendered occupational segregation, and really importantly, sexual harassment. It's not simply a case of reporting the data. Organisations have to translate that data into action, a gender equality action plan every 4 years. They were submitted to me the first time in 2022. The Act only came into effect in 2021, with the next updates due in May 2026. And then we have progress reports every 2 years. So the first progress report was submitted in 2022, so last year. And each organisation must make reasonable and material progress on each one of those gender equality indicators that I mentioned before in every 2 year period. I publish all of their data, I publish their plans, I publish their progress reports. You can go and have a look at any individual organisation that is a duty holder under this legislation, and it's all there for you to see what their pay gap is, what their sexual harassment rate is, etc. And you can map their progress and track their progress. This transparency, I think, will drive change. You can also check on their own websites because it should be published on their own websites as well. But since its commencement in 2021, the Act has compelled organisations to reveal truths that might have otherwise remained hidden. Many initially believed and told me that they were champions of fairness. They are armed with enterprise bargaining agreements and award wages. And yet when they examined their own data, they found a troubling trend. Startling pay gaps emerged, an underrepresentation of women in leadership roles, and workplace sexual harassment that had long gone underreported or unreported in many cases. This is not about assigning blame, though. This is about building an evidence base that forces us to invest in change. The data, after all, is the mirror that shows us our strengths and our shortcomings. It compels us to confront those hard truths and translate those insights into concrete action. When organisations see the data that reveals persistent inequality, then it becomes clear that commitments to gender equality can't be superficial or short-lived. None of these things are going to change overnight. They must be woven into the fabric of our policies, our workplaces, and our community. As I said, transparency bolstered by robust data ensures that organisations are accountable to their staff, to their stakeholders, and to the community at large. And when we publish those data, the plans, etc., we invite public scrutiny, and that is the powerful motivator for change. But just in case it's not a powerful enough motivator, the Act does give me very strong compliance powers that I like to have as a backup. I hope I never have to use. The progress reported in 2024 tells a mixed story, but bearing in mind this is brand new legislation, all but one industry, and that all of the industries, including healthcare, reduced their gender pay gap, not by much, but a hopeful sign that change is possible when organisations hold themselves to account. Local government is the smallest gap by comparison to the health sector. Local government has a 1.7% gender pay gap. while police and emergency services recorded the most significant improvement. However, while women comprise 66% of the sector as a whole, they hold only 48% of leadership positions, which is now a 1% increase from 2 years ago. And we did see a 5% increase in women CEOs, which is really good in just 2 years. From 39% to 44%, our sector as a whole is doing better than the private sector in that regard. And parental leave offers a glimmer of hope as well. While women are 8 in 10 parental leave takers and their leave lasts on average up to 14 times longer than men's, we did see that in 2023 data, women still average nearly 30 weeks of parental leave, but men had increased their participation from an average of 3.9 weeks to an average of 5.2 weeks. Slow progress, but every small step matters. And then unfortunately, there's the issue of sexual harassment, which hadn't gone down between 2021 and 2023. It had actually increased for women and people of self-described gender, whilst it remains static for men. So that basically is a clarion call that having a sexual harassment policy is just not enough to deal with this problem. It does take ongoing staff and leadership training, robust complaint procedures, and leadership that lives and breathes anti-harassment values to change these statistics. One of the most promising tools in our pursuit of gender equality in the legislation is the Gender Impact Assessment, or GIA. Gender impact assessments are required for every duty holder on every, and Peter Mac is a duty holder under the legislation. They're required for every policy, program or service that is new or comes up for review that has a direct and significant impact on the public, which much of our duty holders' work does, in fact. They must report their gender impact assessments to me every 2 years in their progress reports. There's a book called Invisible Women. Has anybody read it? Has anybody read it here? Yeah, there are a few people. There's a book that, it's great to see that, Maria, really good. There's a book that tells the story of why gender impact assessments are so important, better than I could ever do. Caroline Criado Perez, the author, has assembled a cornucopia of statistics from how most offices are 5 degrees too cold for women because the formula to determine their temperature was based in the 1960s on the metabolic rate of a 70-kilo 40-year-old man, and women's metabolisms are slower, so we feel colder. We often have scarves and jumpers on when men are in their shirt sleeves. The other one that you will all be familiar with is the toilet queue at public venues. The construction is just 3% women, and so I am guessing, I don't know this for a fact, I'm guessing that the people that designed the building code that said that women and men, to be equal, should have equal toilet space was probably a man, and no gender lens was put over that. Women take 2.3 times longer to use the toilet, and that is not because they are sitting on the toilet scrolling through their Instagram feed. It is because they have periods, they need to change pads and tampons, they get urinary tract infections at 4 times the rate that men do, so they need to be at the toilet more frequently, they get pregnant, that puts pressure on their bladder, they often have small children with them, they can't use urinals, which don't take so long, etc, etc, etc. If we put a gender lens over that building code and the thought about women's toilets, we would have given them much more toilet space, and we wouldn't have this ridiculous toilet queue at every public venue. Not just that, wasting the thinking space of women planning to get out to the toilet to avoid the queue and then get back in, etc, etc. And how do you organise a drink, and all of the mental work that goes on, the mental load that women so often have to deal with. This is a man's world because the people who built it and designed it did not take gender into account. And she lists example after example of it, whatever you can think of, including car safety standards that have only just recently required female crash test dummies in the driver's seat. And that means that although men are more likely to have car accidents, women are almost 50% more likely to be seriously injured and 17% more likely to die from steering wheel and airbag injuries. Workplace safety regulations where PPE equipment, so healthcare, construction, firefighting, defence and policing, all based on male body sizes, the default male, which is actually makes unsafe jobs even unsafer for women when they're not protected from bullets because bulletproof vests don't have room for breasts, etc. Masks fall down, so you're more likely to catch something, you trip over your gown, etc. Clinical trials, medical research and drug regulation, clinical trials we know in the health field have historically been conducted on men with results then applied to women as if we were small men. Despite differences in how men's, women's bodies metabolize drugs. And there have been some horrific examples of drugs being put onto the market with the adult dose actually being the woman's dose. And from medical emergencies such as heart attack and stroke to mental health care, and gender and sex bias is leading to poorer outcomes for women and gender diverse people, including delayed diagnosis and treatment. We know we've seen just recently about the clinical guidelines that were in the newspaper a couple of weeks ago that didn't refer to sex or gender or referred to it incorrectly and didn't have any implications for different genders in clinical practice. I won't go on. This isn't a conspiracy, though, to exclude or discriminate against women. It is unconscious bias and unthinking exclusion by researchers and designers of policies, programs and services. And that is why it is now the law in all of our public sector organisations that we put a gender lens over our policies, programs and services, because this has devastating impacts when you add it all up. And unless we crunch the numbers and take positive steps, this will just continue. Since the introduction of the Act, we've had more than 1,500 gender impact assessments reported. 75% have led directly to actions that promote gender equality, whether that's in regional councils, catchment management authorities, museums or universities. They've basically shined a light on systemic issues and paved the way for real improvements. Looking ahead, I'll finish. As I stand here today, I see not just the challenges we face, I can assure you of that, but also the promise of what we can achieve, and I hope you do too. The official theme of this International Women's Day is March Forward. It's time to turn promises into progress. And this is a call for every organisation, every community and every individual to actively take part in creating a future where gender equality is a reality, not an aspiration. And yes, while our progress might sometimes resemble that of a rebellious teenager who shows up late and asks for extra time, we know that with the right guidance and determination, change will happen. And I encourage everyone to keep on pushing on, keep marching forward, seek out and confront the discomfort of data that reveals the shortcomings, because every policy, program or service reformed, every data point made transparent, and every organisation daring to challenge the status quo contributes to reshaping our society for the better. The Gender Equality Act is a declaration that we refuse to settle for incremental change when bold progress is possible. It's a promise that every individual, regardless of their gender, deserves dignity, respect, fairness and the opportunity to thrive. Let's ensure that every day moves us closer to a future not determined by gendered limitations, but by boundless potential. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Vincent. That's so inspiring. I've got heaps of questions, but I'm going to open it to the room to see if anyone wants to put up their hands. I'm going to kick it off. So I'm really interested in what your thoughts are on how we can help to future-proof D&I initiatives in Australia, because if there's changing governments, are things like the Gender Equality Act, is that immune from changing government, or just thoughts on that?
Well, it does take a bit more effort to repeal a bit of legislation, I guess. So, I mean, I think we've got that advantage, and I have had to, you know, console my own team about this, who are all really worried. I feel very privileged to be in the role because of the legislation. Most people working in this space don't have a piece of law behind them. I feel like Mary Waldridge, the head of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, was reported, and I know her well, was reported in the paper the other day. And I actually, was a member of the Liberal Party, a conservative politician, and I truly respect the work that she's doing. She said, these conversations come and go, and we have to have those robust discussions. But we know the facts are, we've got the data. There's plenty of research that shows us that this works for individuals, it works for organisations, it works for communities, and it works for Australia as a whole. We know that is the reality. And we just, the good thing is we've got data. We're in Victoria, we're demonstrating what you can do with legislation and high quality data and transparency. And I think that sort of sets us up a little bit in front of many other jurisdictions.
Great, thank you so much. Any other questions? Okay, I've got another one.
I was hoping I'd taken up all the time.
I know you do have to leave at 10:30, but maybe we'll have time for one more quick one.
Sure.
So we're really interested in building our intersectional data here at Peter Mac. I'm just wondering how you're tackling that within the Gender Equality Act.
Yeah, so I mentioned the intersectionality at work report that we put out in 2023. We had to use People Matters survey or employee experience data. So this is people's own reports of how they identify and the kind of salary range that they were in. Now we did that really well, but that data isn't as robust as workforce data, which is tracking employees and so forth. It's contentious. A lot of Australians don't want to talk about their disability. They don't want that identified. They don't want to identify as, First Nations potentially, because they're worried about how that data will be used to discriminate against them. We really do have to get over that. We've got to try and help employees understand how that data will be used for good and not for harm. But at the moment, getting as many staff members to complete employee experience surveys so that we've got a more complete picture of employee's own experience is probably one of the most powerful things that we can do to kind of keep track of that. What we found in that report was astounding. If you take, when we only did a very basic analysis, because that was their data that we had, you took any a way that a person identified in addition to gender, we were looking at compounding discrimination. So if I take First Nations people, when we looked at the data, highest paid, non-Indigenous men, not surprising. Next highest paid, Indigenous men, then non-Indigenous women, then Indigenous women. So you really do see that gender inequality compounded by being First Nation. And that very same pattern showed up when we looked at disability and we looked at culturally and racially marginalised people, although for culturally and racially marginalised people there was the men and non-culturally racially marginalised women were closer, so it was closer in the middle, but at every one you had gender compounded with whatever it was that we looked at that meant they were the lowest paid. So it's astounding. Absolutely astounding. It really is important to track this work.
Great, thank you so much. Oh, there's a Menti. We'll have one quick Menti. Wonderful talk. Policies don't necessarily lead to behaviour change. Is there funding to support implementation?
The legislation requires that every single organisation must resource the implementation of their gender equality action plan adequately. I would have to say that my reflections over the first few years of the implementation are that many organisations were not taking the legislation seriously. I met with many board chairs who had said they hadn't heard of it, which surprised me as I've been a chair chair on many occasions, and it was standard procedure for us to see legislation that the organisation was subject to and be asking questions of the chief executive about how that was being managed and how likely we were or not to meet our obligations, etc. I think because it's gender equality legislation, it wasn't being taken seriously. So for progress reports, I hunted down every single chair of every single duty holder organisation, and I sent compliance feedback to them. I had many an apologetic phone call or a call from chairs saying, we didn't know about this, we didn't realise, and we haven't put enough money to it, and we will be from now on. Also, for the next progress reports and gender equality action plans, CEOs will need to sign an attestation that says that they agree to the plan and they agree to fund and implement it appropriately with the appropriate resources. So we're cracking down on those little loopholes, I think.
Amazing. Thank you so much for all of
Pleasure.
the work that you're doing here. And let's all thanks Dr. Vincent. Okay, so we're running a little bit late, sorry about that, but I think you'll agree that it's been a really exciting morning session and we wouldn't want to cut off anything else to make it shorter. So we're going to come back at 10 to 11. We're going to go out for morning tea. So last year there was a bit of a traffic jam going to the tables. We've got multiple tables. So even though the food's delicious, just spread yourself out. There's plenty for everyone. Yeah, and please, I hope everyone enjoys hanging out, having some good conversations, and we'll see you back at 10 to 11.
Welcome back, everyone. I hear laughter, I hear chatting. It sounds like everyone's having an amazing time, but we do need to move on with proceedings. So we're going to get going. So welcome back, everyone. We hope that you enjoyed morning tea and had a chance to have some excellent conversations with all your colleagues and friends, and possibly even met someone new. We have a lot to get through so that we can finish up by midday. But before we move to the second part of our program, we're going to play a short video. We know how important it is to get girls interested in STEM early and the huge impact that mentorship has in keeping women in STEM fields. To mark International Day of Women and Girls in Science this year, we asked the Peter Mac, the comms team, came up with this initiative, asked the Peter Mac, I feel like I'm like laying claim to it. We asked the Peter Mac researchers about the women that inspired or encouraged their passion for science. We hope that it inspires you to support the younger people in your life to explore science as well.
So women that I've found really inspirational are actually my PhD supervisors. 3 of my 4 supervisors are women. They're all brilliant, professional, welcoming individuals. There's no gatekeeping or ego. They're really invested in fostering success for other women, and I think that's really inspiring.
My supervisor, Professor Alicia Oshlak, has been a really big inspiration because she is really got such a passion for science and for helping train the upcoming generation of new bioinformaticians as well.
My biology teacher back in school, Mrs. Burkha, she was really knowledgeable and sort of built that foundation and curiosity around biology.
My first cousin once removed, so we'll just call her my auntie, Susan Forrest, was a group leader at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, and she got me really interested in genetics research, and she mentored me through my undergraduate and through my postgraduate degree. She ended up being the director of the Australian Genome Research Facility, and we've always kept in contact, and she's always been hugely supportive and understands the difficulties and the challenges faced by women in an academic career.
Yeah, my PhD supervisor in physics was actually the second ever professor of physics in Australia. She's a very inspiring person in many ways and a big supporter of women in science, and that's something that I've tried to be throughout my career as well.
So my biggest inspiration has been my mom. She started her career in cancer research and later transitioned into forensic science. Seeing her dedication to science and the impact of her work showed me from an early age that a career in STEM could be both meaningful and fulfilling.
Sure, so I'm really lucky to work with 2 really inspirational women here, Professor Monica Simon and Professor Karen Thursky, and they lead the National Centre for Infections and Cancer, and they're both really, really successful researchers in their areas, and have been really inspiring in the way that they lead the team. Very inclusive, very supportive environment, and really have sort of mentored me to be a better researcher. To my undergrad course director, Dr. Duca Veldhuis, she's at Monash University. She's an anthropologist by training, but she's running the science course, and she was such a legend to everyone, like the most iconic woman you've ever met in every sense of the word. She really had a lot of faith in us. She had so much passion for everything she did and wanted to make sure that we could get that as well. And I remember seeing her last year, we had like a reunion thing. She's like, I'm so proud of how far you've come, and that just made me cry. It is now my pleasure to introduce the first Lear medalist for 2025, who's going to present their work today, an iconic woman in her own right, Dr. Jennifer Devlin.
Good morning, everybody, again, and thank you all for staying. And I'm excited today to talk to you a little bit about the research area that I work in. But first, I thought I'd give a brief overview of my journey as a cancer researcher. So I started as a summer student at the Ludwig Institute for Cancer Research, which used to be across the road at the Royal Melbourne Hospital. As a summer student, I was supported by the Cancer Council of Victoria, and this is still a really important program that gives university students their first opportunity to experience what it's like to work in a cancer research lab. For my honours and PhD research projects, I went to the old Peter Mac based in East Melbourne, where I worked with Rick Pearson, Ross Hannon and Kate Hannon. And then I took a big life move and I went to Helsinki, Finland for 2 years, where I worked at the Institute for Molecular Medicine, Finland as a postdoc. And then in late 2017, I came back to Melbourne. I came back to the new Peter Mac at this fantastic new building in Parkville, and I joined Ricky Johnston's lab. And that's where I've been ever since. So that's a bit about me. And now I'm going to give you an overview of the cancer research that I do. So my research focus is understanding the control of gene expression and its associated implications for cancer therapy. So DNA is the basis of all life and contains all of the critical information that it's stored in discrete units that we call genes. In order for these genes to be expressed, the DNA must be copied into RNA, and some of these RNA molecules can be translated into proteins, which have different functions in your cells. And there are some RNAs that are not translated. They're called non-coding RNAs, and they have other important functions. So it's this process of making RNA from DNA, which is called transcription, which is the focus of my research. And it's really critical that this process is tightly regulated. It's important that the correct genes are expressed at the correct time, they're expressed at the correct levels, and that they're expressed in the correct place or the correct cell type in your body. And uncontrolled or dysregulated gene expression invariably leads to diseases, developmental disorders, including cancer. So because it's so important, our bodies have evolved multiple different mechanisms to control gene expression. So if you imagine every single cell in your body contains approximately 2 meters of DNA, and this includes 20,000 genes that encode proteins. So we need to be able to control what genes are turned on and when. So there are multiple different layers of regulation. The first is the 3D organization of the genome, where the DNA is wrapped around specialized proteins called histones into structures called chromatin and then eventually chromosomes. And in every human cell, there are 46 chromosomes or 23 pairs. The second layer is called the epigenetic layer, where our DNA and histone proteins are decorated with signals that either tell the cell to turn transcription on or off. These marks are deposited by a group of proteins called writers, they're removed by a group of proteins called erasers, and they're interpreted by a group of proteins called readers. And the final layer is transcription of genes by RNA polymerase II, and this is the focus of my research. So RNA polymerase II is an enzyme which synthesizes RNA from the DNA template. This process of transcription involves multiple steps that RNA polymerase II must complete. And this must be recruited to the beginning of genes. It must initiate transcription. It must pass a quality control checkpoint we call the pause release step. It must complete elongation where the majority of RNA is made. And then it must disengage at the end of the gene and release the RNA. And so in our lab, we like to think of this process as a cycle where RNA polymerase II has to pass through multiple checkpoints. And each of these checkpoints are controlled by a family of proteins called cyclin-dependent kinases, or CDKs. So when I first joined Ricky's lab, I was fortunate enough to be on projects with Stefan Vavor and Zheng Fan, where we identified for the first time a role for CDK13, cooperating with CDK12 to control POL2 elongation. I was also involved in a project where we identified a new axis where CDK9 cooperates with the integrator PP2A complex to fine-tune the pause-release checkpoint. My current research project is on a protein called CDK11. So this was a protein that we previously didn't know very much about, and we certainly didn't understand how it really controlled transcription or gene expression. But we've been able to show for the first time that CDK11 acts at the pause release checkpoint slightly upstream of CDK9. So we've used different methods, including anti-CDK11 drugs and experimental methods to degrade CDK11 protein to look at how it influences gene expression. So you can see here that we were able to measure how much RNA some cancer cells made. So at the top in the control condition, you see there's lots of RNA being made, but if we treat the cells with an anti-CDK drug, this is decreased, and it demonstrates that CDK11 is critical for gene expression. So the big question is, why is it important for us to understand how proteins like CDK11 and other CDKs control gene expression? So as I mentioned at the beginning, properly controlled gene expression is essential to avoid diseases, including cancer. So in the Johnston lab, many of us work on blood cancers for our research. So there are multiple different types of mature blood cells in your body, which have different functions. But all of these originate from a stem cell population and progenitor cell populations, which have self-renewal properties. Sometimes mutations occur in this pathway, which result in the disruption of normal blood cell differentiation and can lead to leukemias or lymphomas, with myeloid leukemia here as an example. And a number of these mutations impact gene expression. So as an example, in one type of leukemia, there's an MLL rearrangement. So MLL is a protein that's encoded by a gene on chromosome 11, and this protein promotes the expression of genes required for myeloblast self-renewal. Another protein is called AF9, encoding by a gene on chromosome 9. This is part of a super elongation complex that promotes the high expression of specific genes. So in some leukemias, there's a mutation where part of chromosome 11 and chromosome 4 are glued together. And this results in this fusion protein, and consequently, we get the massive overexpression of these myeloblast self-renewal genes, leading to leukemia. So because these myeloid cells exhibit this dependency on increased expression of these genes, they are vulnerable to inhibiting cyclin-dependent kinases with these small molecule inhibitors or drugs, some of which have gone into clinical trials for different types of cancer. So using a CDK11 drug as an example, we can treat our leukemia cells, and we can assess the impact of blocking CDK11 on leukemia cell death or the ability of the leukemia cells to divide. When we use increasing doses of our anti-CDK11 drug, we see that there's more cell death, and these are two different cell lines, leukemia cell lines originally isolated from leukemia patients. And we also see with more drug, we see the reduced amount of leukemia cell division. Another cancer that we're currently investigating in the Johnston lab is pancreatic cancer, and these are generally associated with mutations in a gene called KRAS. We took a panel of human pancreatic cancer cells, which have different KRAS mutations, and we tested how they responded to different anti-CDK drugs. So again, in this direction, increasing the concentration of drugs. What we see is a decrease in the proliferation or the ability of these pancreatic cancer cells to divide. But importantly, it's not uniform for all of the different anti-CDK drugs. And this is important information, knowing what doesn't work as well as knowing what does work. Finally, another interest of my research is the interplay or the relationship between different layers of regulation of gene expression. And so a project that my newest PhD student is taking on is investigating whether combining inhibitors of CDKs as well as inhibitors of the epigenetic regulation will have better impacts against cancer cells. And so this is some preliminary data from my student. So in the gray bars is the anti-epigenetic drug by itself, and in the red bar is the anti-epigenetic drug with an anti-CDK7 drug. And hopefully you can appreciate that when we use these two types of drugs together, we see much better impact upon the cancer cell viability. So I'm really excited that the Leah Medal will enable me to continue to accelerate this research, investigating how the regulation of gene expression can be used to, understanding that can be used to find new therapeutic vulnerabilities to improve cancer treatment. And so this is probably the most important slide, the acknowledgement slide. So I need to thank everybody in the gene regulation lab, in particular my PI, Ricky Johnston. But I also need to say a massive thank you to Ben Martin, who's not here today, unfortunately. He's worked with me for the last 6 years on these projects, and he's just been an incredible person to work with. I also need to thank all of the students that I've supervised in the Johnston lab. So Shanali and Yvonne are my current students, but then students who have worked with me over the years. I've really had a wonderful time supervising them. And as I mentioned earlier, I think it's made me a better scientist and a better person. I'd also like to thank many people from across the different core facilities and other labs at Peter Mac, my consumers, Alison and all of the grants team. And I'd also like to thank all of you for your attention today. And just lastly, I'd like to thank my amazing parents and my wonderful sisters for all of their support over my life. Thank you.
Well done, Jen. Thanks a lot for giving us an overview of your exciting research and some of the achievements you've made. Now I'm going to open up for some questions while people are maybe having a little think. I was wondering if you could give us I was really excited about some of the new research that you were pitching that you're going to be using for the Leah Award going forward. And I wonder if you can touch on that a little bit to give us an idea of your next steps.
Yeah, so at the moment, as I mentioned, a lot of what we do is we're looking at the ability of cancer cells to make RNA, and if that's impacted when we treat them with these different drugs that block CDK11 or other CDKs. So at the moment, we're really using the short read RNA sequencing, which is really well established and is Peter Mac has a lot of expertise in. There's a new technology called long read sequencing, which has really sort of been in the last couple of years the up and coming technology, and that's something we've never applied to our research in the Johnston lab, and it's something that I'd be really, really keen to be able to have some ability to be able to take some of the research questions we have and try and answer them with this new technology.
Thanks, Jen. And I must confess that I've got a vested interest because I also do the long reads and I love them. So are there any more comments or questions? Otherwise, in the interest of time, we might thank Jen and then welcome our next speaker. Congratulations again, Jen. So now we're going to hear from Dr. Maria Furtado, our second Leah medalist. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you again, and congratulations, Jennifer, on your presentation and your medal. So what I'm going to cover today is a little bit about my career outline, but I think that's kind of been covered by Rosemary early on. I'll talk a little bit about my research output and the kind of research that we're doing here at Peter Mac. So this is where I finished my degree in 2002 and became a clinical psychologist. And I must say that that really is the best job in the world. We get to work with people, find out about their stories and witness life-changing events in people's lives. So I've worked across the public mental health sector, but I came to Peter Mac in 2005 and I joined this legendary lung cancer team here at Peter Mac. My primary role, and there in the corner, was really to work with people and help them face really quite a poor prognosis 20 years ago. Things have changed. So Peter Mac formed as my base and I worked part-time and I went and did different things. I joined the team at Melbourne University in about 2010 and completed my PhD in 2022 and have had some other successes. Rosemary's really covered this part of my resume quite well. My research has been about evaluating large mental health initiatives like the Better Access Initiative or the Australian Digital Mental Health Services. That's the kind of work I do at Melbourne Uni. And Peter Mac, my work is really about developing, co-designing and evaluating psychosocial interventions. And what I'm really trying to do is to merge my suicide prevention work at Melbourne Uni with my Peter Mac work at with my work at Peter Mac. So why is psychosocial research important? About 40% of people diagnosed with cancer will have a diagnosable mental health condition at some point. 80% of our people that come through our hospitals experience significant distress. Psychosocial needs over and over have been shown to be one of the most common unmet need in the cancer population. The next bit's quite depressing and quite sad. People with a severe mental illness and a cancer diagnosis die 20 years younger. They die from treatable cancers. And they're less likely when they do come into our systems and healthcare sector that they will adhere and complete treatments. And they have a worse quality of life outcomes based on that. So there's lots to do there. My vision for psychosocial oncology research is really to improve to do research that improves mental health outcomes, quality of life, and the well-being of people with cancer. It's really to be seeing cancer as working with the biopsychosocial model. There's the biology and the psychosocial stuff that needs to be addressed. We can't keep separating the body and the mind. So I'm going to talk to you about a couple of projects that I'm really proud of that we've done in our department. The first one is the CanSleep program. People may have heard about this over time at Peter Mac. 60% of people with cancer will experience significant sleep difficulties. The first line of treatment, the gold standard treatment, is cognitive behaviour therapy. Most people do not have access to that kind of treatment. They have access to prescription medications, which have other side effects. So we had a Department of Health fund, grant fund, and we joined up with the Royal Melbourne and the Women's and developed a model of care that screened patients for sleep difficulties. If they had psychologically driven sleep difficulties, such as insomnia, they were offered a short intervention, a self-management intervention. We developed a booklet with patients and staff, and they were coached on how to use these strategies. The whole intervention took about 30 minutes. And if they didn't get better with the self-management, they were stepped up in a CBT group program. And people got better. 60% of people that got through the program got better with self-management alone, and 40% got stepped up into the group. The intervention was effective. We got some more funding, and it was adapted to AYA cancer population here at Peter Mac. The Ovarian Cancer Australia thought this was an excellent model of care, so they've taken some of the work and we're adapting it to work in the community settings. We've also adapted the CanSleep model into we've adapted the booklet into Arabic, Vietnamese, and simple Chinese to make it accessible for our cold populations. Another project that Fiona in my team leads, and I am the senior researcher on it, is our CALM project. So CALM is a 4-session, it's a short, brief intervention to work with people towards the end of life. It has really good evidence for people towards the end of their life and in palliative care settings. We worked with Gary Roden at Princess Margaret to adapt this intervention for people treated with immunotherapies and targeted therapies in our lung space. There are no interventions for helping this population group live with uncertainty, not knowing if the drug therapies will work for them, if they work for how long. So we worked closely with Princess Margaret to trial a small pilot of 19 patients in the lung unit, and it was very successful. 67% experienced remission in their depression, 80% experienced reduction in death anxiety, 90% reported improvements in quality of life. And you've got some quotes down the bottom about how important these kinds of interventions are to patients. One patient said, "The support from the CALM was incredible. I only wish I had access to this on the day I was diagnosed. Having the opportunity to talk to a therapist with my partner helped me in a huge way. Talking to a therapist together helped my partner open up and talk about how it has been for her." So that was the trial, and now we're looking at ways to expand and run a larger trial on this study. So my area really has been, or my PhD has looked at suicide prevention. Suicide is a global problem. About 700,000 people die of suicide a year. It's a leading cause of death amongst young people, and 3 times more likely men are to die by suicide than females. It affects whole communities when you experience a suicide, and people with cancer are 2 to 4 times more likely than the general population to die by suicide. And there are higher rates in progressive disease, and the people are more likely to die by suicide within the first 6 months of diagnosis. And the other really frightening fact is sometimes they are also more likely to die within 7 to 14 days after a medical consultation. And 70% of people in our have never been referred to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or anything like that. So this is my sort of when I finish my PhD, this is the kind of research I have done, and I will talk a little bit about how I'm going to try and implement some of this in the cancer care. So at the University of Melbourne, working with Jane Perkins, we looked at interventions, universal interventions to prevent suicide amongst young people. We thought we should go do a universal approach because suicide happens, but it's rare, so it's harder to do. So if we educate whole communities, it is more likely to affect. So we looked at making public service announcements. We reviewed all the literature on what is good practice and what to include in public service announcements. And then we worked with young people at risk of suicide and clinicians and world experts in the suicide to develop messages. And then we tested these 3 suicide prevention messages in a randomized control trial of 400 young people, and that was very hard to get through ethics, and it was very hard to monitor the risk and accountabilities through that, but we got through, and our research actually showed that it was safe to have public service announcements. Because this research hasn't really been done, we found that a dose of 30 seconds on one occasion doesn't make life changes, but we don't actually know yet what the optimal dose would be. And this is, and so it was really out of my field doing public service announcements, but I just want to show you one of the ads that we made.
I went through this time when I didn't want to live anymore. I just kept thinking about killing myself.
I started to write my thoughts down to get them out of my head.
I made sure I spent time with someone every day.
I gave myself something to do and focus on each day, something that gave me a sense of purpose.
I did some exercise every day, whatever I could.
Eventually, I went to see a counsellor. Just find what works for you. You can do things to change your suicidal thinking.
So that was really fun. We got to work with actors and I got to work with ad companies. It was a whole new language, but it was totally fun to do. I've got a Discovery Partnership Fellowship, and my aim is to kind of try and find ways to intervene with suicide in cancer. This work isn't being done globally. So we're just at our first stage. I've reviewed the literature and surprise, surprise, we haven't really found anything with good evidence. So our next bit is to look at a co-design and trial a feasibility study on an intervention that working with mental health experts, suicide prevention experts and patients to do. The other thing that we struggle with as clinicians in cancer settings here at Peter Mac and globally is there are no guidelines of what to do or how to assess or how to help what best practice guidelines in oncology. So what I'm really hoping that the Lear Medal will do for me is help me build some of these collaborations and develop some guidelines, best practice guidelines to support our clinicians. So what I wished my road to research would have been like this, but I went and became a clinical person for the 20 years of my career, and now I'm getting back into research. There are lots and lots of people that have supported me along the way and have been great advocates and supported my work, which I'm very grateful to all of them. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Maria. That video is quite profound and very moving. And the work you're doing obviously has such huge impact on people's lives. Even you can see that in the small, in your pilot studies and the initial work. I'd really like to hear just a little bit more about, you've got the Discovery Partnership, congratulations, that's fantastic. How is the Lear Medal going to add to your research program? What are you going to do next?
Well, what I'm hoping to do with the Lear Medal is we've got some partnerships internationally already, and people are really wanting to do some work in the area. So what I'm hoping is that it's going to bring bring us together and brainstorm of how to write some of these practice guidelines and do a bit of a consensus of what should be included in such guidelines to help guide clinicians here and overseas is what I'm hoping it will do.
Much needed. Do we have any more questions? One down the back, Ricky. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Beautiful talk and congratulations on your career today. And I know there's lots more to come. Pat McGorry was on the radio earlier this week talking about mental health as being something that still isn't front and centre, certainly from government, around support and appropriate funding. Just wonder what your thoughts are around what Peter Mac can do to help actually strengthen, I guess, that advocacy for mental health support across the country.
That's a tough question, Ricky. Jason, I think there's lots we can do, and I think that we just need little things. When we get more hospital beds, I think that they're going to need mental health and advocate in our services. When there's a new research, a clinical research, or think about how this is going to impact on people. So there's things on an everyday basis that we can do. But I really do think that cancer, we need to be moving to thinking a biopsychosocial model. And in everything we do, it's a biopsychosocial model. The person can't be separated from their body and their mind. And the more that we have that cultural change in our spaces, the more we can advocate to government. Pat McGorry has been instrumental to what he's done in youth mental health. And he's been a great champion, and we have had leaders like that in the adult mental health sector, and Jane Purkis is one of those leaders at Melbourne University who has advocated for mental health. More needs to be done. We had a Royal Commission not that long ago, and we know what they said about the Victorian mental health system, so we need to be doing more. And our population, we do know that the population that will be coming into Peter Mac in the future, we hope has more severe mental illness. We hope that they get treated and not die 20 years younger than the rest of the population. So we really need to invest in making mental health an essential part of what we do.
Thank you. We just have time for one quick last question, Karen.
Congratulations, Maria.
Thanks, Karen.
You spoke a lot about mental health for people who have cancer. As the Chief Operating Officer here, I'm equally as concerned about our people and our people who manage and care for people with cancer. What are your thoughts on supporting the mental health and suicide prevention for people who work in the cancer industry?
I think that health professionals deal with a lot in the cancer profession. They deal with a lot. Burnout is quite high. I think none of us have fully recovered from COVID as well. So there's ongoing pressures around that. I think that we should definitely look after our staff and definitely put places like what Peter Mac's done. And when I need to acknowledge that Peter Mac has done a lot of things about well-being of staff during COVID, after COVID. There's the huge investment in the in-house psychology services for staff here at Peter Mac. We are living in a different time, and most of us, whether we talk about it or not, have been affected, will be affected by mental health, and we just need to be incorporating it in everything we do.
Well, thank you so much, Maria, from one psychosocial researcher to another. I'm delighted, and congratulations with the Leah Medal. Thank you, everyone. Please join us.
Thank you.
And now we're very excited to introduce our second keynote speaker for today, Professor Shaneen Sandhu. Professor Sandhu is a consultant medical oncologist here at Peter Mac and a researcher in the melanoma and uro-oncology units. She's a research lead for Peter Mac's melanoma medical oncology service And Professor Sandhu leads the clinical, translational and laboratory research in skin cancers and prostate cancer and sits on multiple international advisory panels. Her research work has a major focus on designing and conducting biologically driven clinical trials to translate lab findings into new clinical treatments. She also studies biomarkers of response and resistance to treatment. With more than 218 peer-reviewed articles, Professor Sandhu has been published in the New England Journal of Medicine, the Journal of Clinical Oncology, Cancer Cell, Cancer Discovery, and Lancet Oncology. Currently, Professor Sandhu is leading a multidisciplinary team that is exploring adverse reactions to immune checkpoint inhibitor drugs in people with melanoma. The project has received $5 million through a synergy grant from the NHMRC in late 2024. And we are incredibly excited that Professor Sandhu agreed to deliver this address, and we warmly welcome her to the 2025 Women in Science Symposium.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to the organisers for actually asking me to speak in this important meeting. In truth, I give a lot of talks, but I think this is probably one of the talks that, I was very thoughtful about, in part because I wanted my effort to be of service and to say something meaningful to all the young women in this room. And that required me to think about the arc in my journey. And it required me to consider critically all the touchstones in my life and also the people that have helped me in this journey, although largely unconsciously, because that's what actually happens. We touch each other's lives and we don't know about it. So just to give you a sense of my journey. So I've been around a little bit. I was born in Singapore. My parents come from an Indian heritage and are Malaysian. And we were living in Singapore at the time. My father had a job there. My father was educated in London and he died when I was 4. My mother, with her 3 daughters, 3, 4, and 5, moved in with my grandmother and our extended family. During the entire childhood, I recognized my mum's work ethic, her strength, and her determination. Life was not always easy, but she did bring up 3 women, 3 daughters, and 3 doctors. Once a gastroenterologist, once a rheumatologist, and once an oncologist. And this on a single mother's salary in Malaysia. Her view of the world was always that you can always find a way, and that mindset has stayed with me. In my extended family, there are 2 doctors, 1 nurse, and 1 chemist. And in some ways, like all Indian families, medicine was the family business. So the underpinning values at home were largely education, first and foremost, service, and spirituality. My mother's mantra to us growing up is you're never going to get an inheritance and your education is your inheritance and you just need to know that. And then there was the second mantra, which was service is worship. And so if you do your service well, that is worship. Like my mother, my grandmother was also widowed and she had raised 8 children on her own. And so there was this very strong sense of women's power. You just got on and you just did what you need to do to get things done. I moved to Melbourne when I was 17 with my sister, and I still recollect the giddy excitement of now being independent and living in an apartment on your own and the sense of limitless possibilities ahead of you and the ability to shape your own mind and your own world. I got a scholarship to do medicine at the University of Melbourne, which was 6 years of fun, a lot of growing up, and some learning. I subsequently did my physician training at the Western and at the Alfred Hospital and had the good fortune of genuine mentorship from the care from Professors Lila Rothstein and Gary Lane, 2 extraordinary physicians who took a genuine interest in me. And sometimes that's all you need. Someone to see you, to see your potential and to reflect it back to you. I try to pay this forward now with young women as I have a great pleasure in mentoring. I did 3 years of oncology training with my final year at Peter Mac, and there was no shortage of role models. I then moved to the UK with my husband and worked at the Royal Marsden Hospital and as a fellow, and within 7 months, I was asked to step up by the medical director of the Royal Marsden Hospital, Professor Martin Gore, and to take up his role as the consultant in what they called the Rare Cancer Services, which was made up of melanoma, renal cancer, and ovarian cancer. Professor Martin Gore was another mentor, again, not formally, but his genuine leadership, caring, clear thinking, and purposeful approach and ethos of service resonated strongly with me. He was often in at 6 a.m. listening to jazz and doing his emails or writing, and then he left at 8 p.m. But he always had time for you. I would knock on the door as this young emerging consultant and say, Martin, can I discuss this complex case with you? And assume that he'd come up, tell me what to do in 2 minutes. But it was often 45 minutes later before he ushered me out. During this time, I had the privilege of working with James Larkin and Charlie Swanton, who were completing their PhDs. And they used to saunter into clinic and chat up the nurses. In those days, there was nothing to offer melanoma patients except palliative chemotherapy. And there were many days on the back of a 40-patient melanoma clinic where I spent many hours in retail therapy on Kings Road at the LK Bennett store, if you know it. I then moved to the Sutton branch of the Royal Marsden Hospital and the Institute of Cancer Research in Surrey to do a fellowship in drug development with a young and up-and-coming doctor called Professor Johan de Bono, who at that time had just taken a drug that had failed and it was on the shelf, and he repurposed it, redesigned a trial, and it resulted in the drug being sold for $1 billion. Johan is a limitless person, and again, a genuine mentor. He had a vision, created opportunities, and allowed autonomy. I saw him build a trials team and a lab from a handful of folks to in excess of 150. He would ask me to attend pharma meetings with him, and I would listen and learn how he engaged with them, and I learned a great deal. This 6 years in drug development was very formative for me, and with many fellows coming from a whole range of Singapore and Spain, and it was a melting pot. Many of them have now gone on to lead up departments internationally. It's here that I wrote my first CR UK grant, which I got for £600,000, and took a concept from personalized cancer medicine from proof of concept to a phase 2 trial, convinced pharma to invest, which took 18 months of dogged persuasion. And that body of work led to the first ever molecular stratified therapies for prostate cancer on the back of a 45-patient study that was well designed, a New England first author paper, and billions of dollars, again, changing hands between pharma on the back of a 45-patient study. Personally, it was exciting to drive something forward from proof of concept all the way to phase 3 registrations, and I was hooked, and I've not looked back. I moved back to Melbourne in June 2012 to take up a consultant position in the melanoma and prostate stream, and over the years have had the good fortune and excitement to practice changing work, finding ways to leverage Peter Mac's strengths, working closely with colleagues, recognizing nurturing talent, creating opportunities, and building a team. My research program has led to 7 new therapies for both melanoma and prostate cancer, leadership roles in multiple phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials, involvement in steering committees, and also data safety monitoring committees. I've had 70 invited chairs, speaking engagements, and have raised and have secured approximately $80 million in funding. I think what I'm most proud of is the team and the novel and innovative work we continue to do here. I've been privileged to co-supervise 25 oncology trainees and fellows and mentor postdocs and PhD students. And currently I'm building a small team that I'm involved in cutting edge translational research. I'm grateful for the support of my colleagues, especially Colleen Cullinan, who again recognized my potential, and many others like Grant MacArthur, Lavinia Spain, Abner, Michael Hoffman, Gail Risbridger, Louise Emmett, and many people to acknowledge. So just what is gender equality? I think it's equal opportunity, but not just equal opportunity. It's about finding a position. It's not just about filling a position, but creating a culture, a support structure to make the best of that opportunity. I don't think it's enough that people are given opportunities if they're then hampered from actually making the best of those opportunities. It is, for this, there needs to be consideration that men and women are not built the same way. We think differently and we have different needs, namely the structure around childcare and flexible working. And again, both for men and women, men also have a desire to be a present father. For me, I currently long to pick up my 5-year-old, and I'm grappling with how I do that in the context of my job and the framework of my job. My view is gender equality is not a woman's issue, but a human issue. It is one of achieving our full potential and getting out of our own way. But sometimes we just need to navigate the internal and external noise, and there is a lot of noise and distractions. So some of my key insights, I think, we all get to create. We create our lives, and we can do it one of two ways. We can do it by default or by design. And why not do it by design? Why not figure out what you want, who you want to be, what you want to have, how do you want to do it, get the skill set aligned and get the support. I think Shakespeare certainly says that our doubts are traitors and make us lose the good we might ought win by fearing to attempt or stopping in mid-course. And we all carry some baggage of fear. I think we have to embrace fear and create a new relationship with fear and realize that fear is coming along for the journey and is a companion for the journey. And increasingly now, what I do is I talk to my fear. I say, I see you there, and that's okay, I've got this. So embracing fear and recognizing it when we, and because often we feel fear when we are actually at the cusp of our comfort zone. And we need to just remind ourselves that life is outside of that comfort zone. So I think giving is also important, whether that's a kind gesture, a word, a shared opportunity, and to look out for something. And then I've learned in recent times, and increasingly I keep learning this lesson, there are two sorts of friends. There are the friends that we love and cherish, that when they do something, it's very easy to forgive. And then there are the sacred friends. And this is what the Dalai Lama says, that there are two sorts of friends, and these sacred friends are the ones that betray you, that you have resentment for, that cause you to grieve and hold a hurt. And it is this sacred friends that if you can learn to find a way forward and forgive, it actually pushes you forward. And so that's why they're sacred. And I have plenty of both friends. So finally, I think, one of the things I'm increasingly learning is that it's important to have somebody that also believes in you, whether that's a counselor or whether that's a coach or whether that's a friend, but, a partner in believing. And having someone that can actually put up a mirror to your face to help you. To distinguish your voice from the cacophony of other voices and medias and naysayers and diminishers for which there are many, just to remind us of who we truly are, what we want, what we're capable of, and not to give in to our self-imposed intrinsic and extrinsic limitations. It's terribly important to find someone who's outside of the fray, not caught up in your condition, to help you see clearly, someone who can believe that you are a no-limit person. And these relationships need to be sincere. So some final thoughts. I mean, I hope I haven't come across as somebody who's figured it out. That's clearly not the case. In truth, I'm a work in progress and there are many, many challenges. So some final thoughts is I think that it's important that we need a male perspective. We need to bring men on the journey. Both men and women need to recognize that we all have personal biases that we bring to the table in our day-to-day interactions. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely a gender battlefield. Call it out, talk about it, and move on. But it is important to bring men on the journey with us. So I hope in the next year, the keynote will be a male. And I also hope that half of this room is filled by men. I want to finally end with a quotation. I'm a Baha'i, and I wanted to end with an excerpt from some of the teachings. And it has always believed that men and women are equal. And it reads, the world of humanity has two wings. One is woman and the other man. Not until both wings are equally developed can the bird fly. Should one wing remain weak, flight is impossible. Not until the world of women becomes equal to the world of men, in acquisitions of virtue, perfections, can success, prosperity be attained as it ought to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shanine. I was going to ask you some questions, but you've run away. I will ask you afterwards. No, thank you so much for those words. I personally find that really inspiring. It's so great to hear the story that sits behind the researcher, the leader, and in your case, you're so multidimensional. It's just really inspiring to hear your story. So I guess this is going to save us some time. So thanks, Shanine. So I'm just going to go wing it. So to close out today's program, I would love to welcome Peter Mac Chief Executive Professor Jason Payne up. Thank you very much, Jason.
Thanks, Laurie, and good morning, everyone. It's my absolute privilege to be able to close today's wonderful session. It's great to see so many Peter Mac staff in attendance here today. Well, this is my second Women in Science Symposium that I've attended, and it's a real honour to be involved once again. I've really felt a fantastic feeling today of celebration and a supportive mood for today's event. I've heard the excited chatter at the break. I've seen the support in the room, and I'm sure, like me, you've been inspired, you've felt moved, and personally, I'm more determined than ever to make a difference. We've highlighted some very real challenges and noted the work that we have to do ahead of us to achieve true equity in our workplaces. But I note that there's a real sense of optimism that we're moving in the right direction here at Peter Mac. And that's thanks to all of you. Your amazing leadership, your talent and your support for one another is really recognised and noted by the board and the executive team, and you have our full backing. Listening and understanding are obviously key to making this kind of progress that we need, but more importantly, we need to take action. And as I said, I'm very determined and more determined than ever after being here today to take decisive action to continue to close the gender equity gap. I'd like to encourage any men here today in the audience to get more involved in equity initiatives. Achieving a more equitable workplace is everyone's responsibility. I want to extend sincere thanks to Associate Professor Forrest and Dr. Smith for being such great hosts today. You've done a wonderful job. Your leadership as co-chairs of the Research, Gender, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Committee have made such a huge difference for many of our researchers and set a new standard of culture at Peter Mac. This is Associate Professor Forrest's final time co-hosting the event, as we've already noted, and she'll soon step aside from the co-chair position. So please join me in thanking her for devoting such energy and time to the Research, Gender, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Committee since its inception. A wonderful, magnificent job. Thank you also to the whole Research, Gender Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Committee group for your passion and your foresight. Once again, thank you to all of our speakers and congratulations to our Lear medalists. We saw two wonderful presentations. Again, I was so inspired by the work that you do, this awe-inspiring work. It's really a true testament to the brilliance that you bring to your roles and the passion and commitment that you display. We look forward to seeing your work thrive here at Peter Mac, and it's terrific that you've been able to be awarded some funding to help you do this. So I hope everyone takes something away today from the series of talks that have been presented by our speakers. We've seen a broad range of discussion here today. Wonderful consumer story. We've seen the impact that change in legislation is making across the sector. And we've seen our own women in science leaders here at Peter Mac deliver amazing presentations. So thank you everyone for joining us and have a wonderful weekend. And we look forward to seeing you at the Lear Medal and the Women in Science Symposium next year. Thank you.